The patrons have spoken, and next up we have Floatzel. This Pokemon was a source of much joy to those who played Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum in-game, as it would evolve from the Buizel you caught relatively early on, and eventually turn into one of your team's most trusted members, surfing through game locations and opposing trainers alike. Even if you didn't use Floatzel, you saw it as Gym Leader Crasher Wake's strongest Pokemon, while your rival Barry would use it if you didn't pick Piplup as a starter. Floatzel was synonymous with Gen 4 in-game much in the same way Staraptor and Luxray were. Those who played those games would remember it as their introduction to this new priority move with the cool name, Aqua Jet. Today we're going to see if Floatzel was able to transfer any of this in-game fondness into competitive scene success. And so, we ask, how good was Floatzel actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Offensively threatening water types are generally great, as they abuse one of the best stabs in the game, but they're also far from rare, and thus Floatzel was not without significant competition right off the bat. However, it was also blessed with many strong distinguishing traits of its own. Its blazing fast-based 115 speed stat was the same one that had made Starmie so excellent for so many years, while its strong 105 base attack stat was the same as for alligators. Plus, Floatzel wasn't necessarily beholden to using physical attacks. Its more than decent base 85 special attack gave it plenty of options to work with. Finally, Floatzel had an excellent move pool. In addition to the ice-type coverage standard for offensive waters, it could also strike Ghosts and Psychics super effectively with Crunch, had stab priority with great coverage in Aqua Jet, it could deny opposing walls recovery with Taunt, it could boost with Bulk Up, and it could hand those boosts and or substitutes to a teammate with Baton Pass, with Taunt also preventing any attempts to Roar or Whirlwind. Baton Pass could also be used as a pseudo U-turn to scout the opponent's switch. It could also make its water stab even stronger while rocketing its speed past the rest of the game by activating its Swift Swim with Rain Dance, and could even snipe fleeing Pokemon, namely Ghosts and Psychics, with Pursuit. Floatzel was positively overflowing with solid options. Of course, Floatzel wasn't without significant flaws. It was incredibly frail, as its solid HP stat was betrayed by positively paltry defenses. It also didn't quite hit hard enough to compensate for this. But wait, wouldn't this apply to Feraligatr, which shared its attack? Well, Gator also had much better boosting options in Dragon Dance and Source Dance, as well as having much bulk that let it actually take hits, which made it much easier to both set up and blast through the opponent. This didn't make Floatzel bad though, it just meant that it wasn't going to see use in UU, where it'd be unable to compete with not just Gator, but also the much stronger, much bulkier Azumarill. These traits were more valuable in the largely bulk-centric metagame than Floatzel's much higher initial speed. Floatzel hit its stride once it reached NU, and this certainly wasn't for lack of a competition either, as this was a tier with both Sharpedo and Poliwrath. However, they couldn't hope to match the utility of Floatzel's phenomenal speed, which was on full display as it revenge killed even the likes of Tauros, which was already considered one of the fastest Pokemon around for its ability to jet past the speedy in its own right tier king Charizard. Indeed, Floatzel was the fastest unboosted Pokemon in the tier, and put this talent to use as it became uniquely capable of unleashing its fierce offensive assault, easily out-offensing offensive threats. But it did this while also being immensely difficult for defensive Pokemon to switch into. In addition to hammering Charizard, which was invaluable in its own right, Floatzel's excellent water stab also plowed through the rock and ground types that were most teams' obligatory defensive cornerstone, like Regirock, Sandslash, Nidoqueen, Golem, and Rhydon. The tier's most common water resistance, Slowking, was also far from safe against Floatzel, as it was chunked by Crunch. Floatzel was intensely threatening to huge portions of teams, with only its frailty holding it back. The place its irreplaceable brand of offense held in the metagame was massively significant, both in breaking down other teams' defenses and how it prevented its own team from getting run over by opposing threats. Floatzel was a fantastic key presence in Generation 4 NU. As a quick aside, Buizel didn't have much in the way of impact on the DPP Little Cup metagame, but it did have a fun little niche in the tier as a terrifying Swift Swim abuser on Rain Dance teams. Rain was tough to pull off with the excellence and prominence of Snover, so it was relatively rare, making Buizel relatively rare as well. But on the occasion it did show up, it had the potential to be massively effective, as DPP LC was an incredibly fast, frail metagame where speed kills, and it doesn't get much more faster and hard-hitting than Buizel under Rain, bowling over nearly everything on sight. Plus, non-Scarf Snover wasn't exactly keen on switching into it to cut Rain off, since it got smacked by Life Orb Return. Floatzel received 2 superb tools in Generation 5. The first was Switcheroo, which provided an incredible new tool for messing with opponents. Even if the opposing wall was too bulky for it to break through, it'd be ruined when Floatzel switcherooed a choice item onto it. The second was the Water Veil ability, which was less immediately impactful, yet held superb value as well in making Floatzel immune to burn. Blanking Will-O-Wisp and not fearing Scald activation was both incredibly helpful for a team as well as boosting Floatzel's switch-in opportunities. Floatzel had a decent place in NU once again. Outrunning Charizard and Tauros was an outstanding trait, as was its ability to jet past newcomer Superior. However, Floatzel had quite a significant drawback. If you were going to use an offensive water type in NU, Samurott was the go-to, unless you were using Rain, but in those cases you'd prefer Ludicolo and Gorebyss, so Floatzel wasn't going to find much of a place there either. But Rain, while decent, was more on the niche side, whereas Samurott was incredibly common and thus the real roadblock to Floatzel's own usage. Yes, Samurott didn't come close to matching Floatzel's amazing speed, but was better in pretty much every other regard, whereas Floatzel was known for its frailty. Samurott was quite good at taking hits, with significantly higher HP, defense, and special defense. Its special attack was also much higher. Yes, its attack stat was a bit lower than Floatzel's, but it more than made up for this with access to Swords Dance. Plus, in practice, Samurott actually had a higher attack stat than Floatzel even prior to boosting, because its lower speed meant it didn't have to run a speed boosting nature, which Floatzel could never afford to do. Pokemon can be strange sometimes. Floatzel certainly wasn't a bad Pokemon. Being able to switcheroo a choice band onto Lomomola or just plow through faster offensive teams with banded waterfalls was a great niche. It was just an example of opportunity cost. Yes, you could run Floatzel and do decently, but you wouldn't be able to run Samurott on the same team without seriously compromising your team, and most of the time you'd prefer to run Samurott, which matched up better against the meta for its bulk and higher damage output. Gen 5 wasn't all bad for Floatzel though, as again the additions of Water Veil and especially Switcheroo were potentially huge. Now if it could only land in the right metagame. And so it did, come Generation 6, which introduced a new tier below NU in the form of PU, where Floatzel was absolutely outstanding and one of the most powerful, defining pokes around. It outsped everything as per usual, but it also absolutely shredded almost everything around it. It most commonly ran special attacking sets, with Life Orb letting it make the most of its coverage to most efficiently tear through the enormous swaths of opposing teams filled with tier staples that hit it for lethal damage, from Stoutland to Pelipper to Leafeon to Monferno to Mawile to Altaria to most pokes you'd see in a given PU match. But it could also run choice specs incredibly well. Forget dancing around it with Life Orb Recoil, it just blasts you with incredibly strong Hydro Pumps that increase the Pokemon it could KO when hitting for neutral damage while also slicing through many common resists. And it could also slot into Switcheroo to completely ruin the few bulky Pokemon capable of taking its hits like Clefairy, Muck, and Chinchou. Floatzel could also effectively trash these specially bulky Pokemon by switching over to a choice band set that bowled them over with Waterfall while still maintaining the capacity to slash through offense via Brute Force and completely cripple a bulky check like Tangela with Switcheroo. Banded Floatzel was also particularly excellent, not just for its wall breaking, but because its strong Aqua Jet extended its revenge killing reach to even that which it otherwise wouldn't be able to take on, like Choice Scarfer's Rotom Frost and Mr. Mime, Speed Boost Combuskin, and Zebstrika, the only Pokemon in the tier that naturally outran Floatzel. Floatzel's Water Veil ability was on full display as well. The burn immunity was tremendous for stifling the many Will-O-Wisps and Scalds flying around the tier. Sure, Clefairy could do this as well, but Clefairy wasn't also one of the most terrifying offensive threats in the metagame. All in all, Floatzel was amazing in ORAS PU. It thanked Arceus for the existence of this new tier perfectly suited for it, one that finally allowed it to unleash its full potential, and in doing so, becoming a metagame shaping presence. PU went through immense power creep in Gen 7 and Floatzel dropped to untiered, but this was not at all telling of the real story. Floatzel didn't just hang on to some tiny niche, it was actually very good, which made the reasoning behind its low usage somewhat of a mystery, but it was all the more impressive for being as good as it was, given how power crept the metagame had become. Floatzel was particularly excellent at using its amazing speed to slice through opposing offensive Pokemon, easily outspeeding even fast ones like Alolan Raichu. You couldn't necessarily stop Floatzel Floatzel with bulk either, as his Focus Blast let it smash through common would-be water checks in Ferroseed and Abomasnow, while other common bulky Pokemon in Regirock, Mudsdale, and Torterra were terrified of it as well. Once again, special sets were Floatzel's most common for how instantly they drop threats like Stoutland, but Choice Band could come out of nowhere to rip through unsuspecting opponents. If you thought Assault Vest Electrosh could stomach Floatzel, you'd be punished hard, especially as Floatzel's physical water stab had finally been upgraded from Waterfall to Liquidation. 5 BP wasn't a ton, but it was still valuable, while the 20% chance to drop the opponent's defense could be downright game-breaking. The addition of Switcheroo also helped Floatzel brutalize defensive teams with even greater ease, utterly ruining the likes of Jellicent, Gastrodon, and Lantern, while ensuring Ferroseed still didn't want to switch into it. Floatzel, being a physical attacker immune to burn thanks to Water Veil, made it even more difficult to deal with. Forget being forced out by Sableyes Will-O-Wisp, Floatzel actually switched into that Will-O-Wisp. This was an amazing boon to the offensive teams it was placed on, which tended to struggle with burns. Floatzel was not without compensation or flaws, of course, but it was quite a solid Pokemon in Generation 7 PU, not at all deserving of its untiered status. Floatzel took Generation 8 off, but has returned with a vengeance in Gen 9, with a new stab move in tow, the amazing Wave Crash, the water-type equivalent to Double Edge and Flare Blitz. Its Choice Band set is newly terrifying with such a powerful spammable move. That's not all either. Floatzel even received an upgrade over Ice Punch, now packing the slightly stronger Ice Spinner for its anti-grass and dragon coverage. Finally, with Terastallization, Floatzel could become even more monstrous. Terra Water Floatzel's banded Wave Crash reaches stunning levels of power. It was used on a few rain teams in OU, marking its first ever appearance in the tier, but it didn't have much impact on the metagame, while UU passed it by as well. However, at the time of this video, it's quite a decent threat in RU. It's particularly vicious on rain teams, which activate its Swift Swim and invalidate outspeeding it as a method of dealing with it, while taking hits from it becomes an even more challenging prospect given the increased Wave Crash damage, especially since Swift Swim boosting its speed lets Floatzel run in adamant nature. Banded Terra Water Wave Crash in Rain is absolutely obscene. Floatzel is heavily favored to 2-hit KO even Slowbro with it. It'll be interesting to see where Floatzel winds up as the metagame continues to develop, but no matter what, it'll have been an RU terror, making a first for its career. In fact, the highest tier placement Floatzel's ever had. Speaking of first, and speaking of higher tier placements, you know what other Gen 9 tier Floatzel has a niche in? Ubers. Yeah, that's right. Yes, it has its flaws, but it's also the best Swift Swim user in the tier. Its speedy, band-boosted Ice Spinner lets it revenge kill the terrifying Miraidon while also hitting Koraidon hard, something Floatzel's stronger but slower rain-abusing teammate Palafin cannot do. Once again, banded Terra Water Wave Crash and Rain perform obscene feats like 2-hit KOing Toxapex, Alomomola, and even some forms of Koraidon. Of course, holding Floatzel back are its reliance on Rain, Massive Frailty, and Wave Crash recoil. But it's high risk, high reward as it can potentially destroy teams like little else. So all in all, Gen 9 is looking to be Floatzel's best yet, and it arguably already has been with its delightful little stint in Ubers. And we're not gonna sugarcoat it, Floatzel isn't good in VGC, and as such, it's only had a handful of appearances over multiple generations. In Gen 6 VGC 2014, Harry Boucher had Floatzel on his team to top cut the Australian Nationals, but he said himself he never used Floatzel once in the tournament. Then in Gen 7 VGC 2018, Floatzel was seen with Pelipper at 2 Korean events, with Jinho Park and Dongguk Jung getting 7th at the Korean Nationals and 3rd at the Korean Winter League respectively, though there were plenty of other rain threats that outclassed it during this year. Finally, Clementine got 6th with Floatzel on their team at the Hatterene Series #1 for Scarlet and Violet. But there's a really good Pokemon named Palafin that does very well with Pelipper too, so it's no surprise that this is the only notable Floatzel appearance so far. Congratulations to these players nonetheless. And that's it. So how good was Floatzel actually? Well, it's always been a solid low tier Pokemon. Yes, it's flawed in its frailty, but it's been blessed with a ton of valuable offensive tools, most notably an incredible speed stat, as well as gaining Switcheroo to ruin bulky Pokemon in Gen 5. Floatzel started with a solid niche in Gen 4 NU, then was more or less passed over in the tier during Gen 5 thanks to strong competition with Samurai. Despite being solid in its own right, that's another issue Floatzel's had, there being no shortage of water type competition. But it still managed to find roles for itself, especially once PU came around in Gen 6. Floatzel became one of the metagame's best Pokemon outright, using its speed to terrorize offense while still being immensely threatening to bulky Pokemon. It impressively reprised this niche in Gen 7 despite the utterly huge power creep changes the tier went through. Then after taking Gen 8 off, it has reappeared in Gen 9 and already had its best gen yet. It was given an amazing buff in Wave Crash, allowing it to finally use its attack stat to the fullest, and alongside Rain and the huge power burst from Terrestrialization, it's carved out a role for itself not just in RU, but even Ubers. So all in all, Floatzel's had a solid competitive career, and it only seems like it's going to get better from here on out. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos and for voting for this Pokemon on this month's Patron Pick. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Floatzel? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And follow my crew in these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.